the Lord appeared to Abraham by the terebinths of Mamre. He was sitting at the entrance of the tent as the day grew hot. Looking up, he saw 3 men standing near him. As soon as he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to greet them and bowed to the ground.
My lords, if it please you, do not go on past your servant. Let a little water be brought. Bathe your feet and recline under the tree, and let me fetch a morsel of bread that you may refresh yourselves. Then go on, seeing that you have come your servant's way.
Do as you've said.
Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah.
Quick, 3 seahs of choice flour. Knead and make cakes.
Then Abraham ran to the herd, took a calf, tender and choice, and gave it to the servant boy, who hastened to prepare it. He took curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them, and he waited on them under the tree as they ate.
Where is your wife, Sarah?
There, in the tent.
I will return to you next year, and your wife, Sarah, shall have a son.
Sarah, who was listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Sarah had stopped having the periods of women, and Sarah laughed to herself.
Now that I am withered, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old?
Why did Sarah laugh, saying, "Shall I in truth bear a child, old as I am? Is anything too wondrous for the Lord? I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son."
I did not laugh.
Sarah lied, for she was frightened.
You did laugh.
The Lord took note of Sarah as he had promised, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken. Abraham gave his newborn son, whom Sarah had borne him, the name of Isaac. And when his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him.
God has brought me laughter. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would suckle children? Yet I have borne a son in this old age. The child grew up and was weaned, and Abraham held a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned.
Thank you for reading that, and reading that so well, and starting us off with that sense of comedy and laughter that I hope will carry through all of this. Before I start, I just want to say it's a little bit of a challenge to preach a Father's Day sermon on a story so focused on Sarah. So I find that comical, and yet another reason I think God has a great sense of humor, that is where this falls in the lectionary. So I just want to say that laughter is something that I associate much more with my dad than I do with my mom. And so in that sense, this subject is really good for me to speak about today. And I want to start with an old Jewish proverb that goes like this: what soap is to the body, laughter is to the soul. So how many of you are fathers? So do you remember when your child was a baby? Some of you, child may still be a baby, and would giggle and then laugh out loud. What was your response to that? Yeah. Well, I know when my son Joe was little, I never tried so hard to hear anything in my life than to get him to laugh. It was infectious. I'd make funny faces and I'd, make funny sounds and I'd tickle him just to hear him scream with laughter. There was a time when he got a little older and he used to start cracking himself up with those horrible knock-knock jokes. Knock, knock. Boo. Oh, I didn't mean to make you cry. And he would howl, just roll on the floor, thinking that was the funniest thing he ever heard. And they just got progressively worse over time. So, anyway, now that he's 20, he doesn't laugh nearly so much. He's a pretty serious guy, a lot like his dad. I think many of us do laugh a whole lot less as we get older. We think if we're silly, we're not taking things seriously enough. And life has a way of dealing some blows that are kind of difficult to laugh at and laugh through. I think, though, that we would be well served by laughing more instead of less, maybe even being a little silly once in a while. There are some studies that talk about the benefits of play, and I was looking at helpguide.org the other day, and they listed several benefits to laughter. There are some physical benefits. One, and this is for you, Larry, because we were talking about this earlier. One, it relaxes your whole body. It boosts your immune system, decreases pain, and helps prevent heart disease. Emotionally, it eases anxiety, relieves stress, diffuses anger, and strengthens resilience. Socially, it strengthens relationships, it diffuses conflict, enhances teamwork, attracts others to us. I know I'd a lot rather hang around with people who are laughing than who are moaning all the time. There's a time for that, but so I think we all could do with a regular liberal dose of side-splitting laughter. There are times, however, when laughter might not be exactly appropriate. I'm going to follow in Jeff's footsteps and tell a true story here. I went to see The Color Purple about a year ago back at the Pollard, and it's one of my favorite musicals, but the story is really tough. It's deep, it's emotional, and it takes you from misery and despair all the way to exuberant joy and happiness. And the finale, the main character, Celie, she's reunited with her children who were taken from her at birth, and also with her sister who'd been sent off to Africa. So as they are reunited, they sing a powerful song, and it deeply touched my soul during this performance. And I got so caught up in what was going on, I started to cry. Not just the polite tears that run down your face when you're around people, but that whole ugly cry with the red swollen eyes, and I couldn't keep, I was losing control and sniffing, and then I got so overwhelmed that I started the belly sobs, And about halfway through the song, I stepped out of myself enough to see the absurdity of the whole predicament. And then I got tickled. So I started to laugh. And here the whole audience in the Color Purple is sniffing a little bit and politely crying. And I'm over here bouncing the entire third row, trying to hold all of this in because I'm not done crying yet. I'm still crying, but I'm laughing at the same time. And my friend Christy, who was with me, sat next to me, and she looked over and she said, "Are you okay? Are you laughing or crying?" And I said, "Oh," and just kept going. So I get that laughter can sometimes overtake you when it's not exactly appropriate. I think it might have been a little like that for Sarah in our story today. But looking at the whole story, I don't think we're entirely fair to Sarah when we judge her for her laughter. Just one chapter earlier, God tells Abraham that he and Sarah will give birth to a son. He laughs so hard, he falls on his face and rolls on the ground. Sarah only laughs quietly to herself. God doesn't give Abraham any difficulty at all about the laughter. And if you look closely at the story, God, the father of this nation he's promised to Abraham, is enjoying making his children, 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 So let's break this down a little bit. Sarah is 90. Abraham is 100 years old. And Abraham was told a chapter ago that they were going to have a son, and he should be named Isaac, which means laughter. Did Abraham tell Sarah? It doesn't look that way. So I have to wonder why. If I had a conversation with God about anything, the first thing I would want to do is run home and tell Jeremy. And then if in that conversation God said something so impossible, downright absurd and silly that I rolled around on the floor laughing so hard, I would definitely want to share that with Jeremy. So I find the entire tone of the story pretty comical, actually. Abraham looks up, and from out of nowhere, there are 3 visitors. Hospitality being the important aspect of Middle East life that it is, Abraham suggests that they stay and let him bring a little bit of something to eat, and the men agree. So Abraham jumps up, and I can just see him running in every imaginable direction, telling Sarah to prepare some bread, but not just some bread. Bread from 6 gallons of grain. Huge amount of bread. And then he goes to a servant and he chooses a calf and has a servant prepare this entire calf. And then he also brings some water to refresh his guest's heart. So there's this frantic urgency to put together an enormous feast for 3 guests. And he still doesn't realize that God is actually one of these guests. He's just doing it because 3 people showed up out of nowhere, and it's his responsibility to take care of them. So once the meal is prepared, the story starts to slow down, and it moves to the purpose of the visit. Feet are washed, people have eaten, and it's time to visit. Sarah perches herself behind the door of the tent, and she eavesdrops on the conversation. And when she hears the news that she will bear a child, she laughs to herself, and she thinks, we don't even have physical relations anymore. Does this mean that I will finally get to have some pleasure with my husband again? Because we're not talking about a virgin birth here. How will I have a child? He is 100 years old, and I don't have a monthly cycle anymore. The absurdity of it all, and the fact that God has made this promise to them several times already, and still no child, all contribute to her laughter. She doesn't want to get her hopes up. She is a little cynical. This is one of the things that I love about Scripture. We're told of these great people of faith: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, Solomon, Peter, Paul, and the list goes on and on and on. And every single one of them get it wrong at some point. Here, God asks Abraham why Sarah laughed. And she quickly says, I didn't laugh. And either God or Abraham, the text isn't entirely clear, it could be read either way. Oh, yes, you did. I heard it. Then God subtly rephrases what she was thinking. Maybe he didn't think that Abraham's male ego could handle her entire thought, and she said, how am I to have a child when I am so old? Then he asks her the big question: is anything too wondrous for God to do? You just wait and see. In a year, you're going to have a baby. But maybe, as is suggested by Ellen Frankel, maybe Sarah didn't lie exactly. Maybe she said, no, I didn't laugh, because she didn't laugh at God. Perhaps she was laughing at herself. She knows God can perform this miracle. She's not so sure about her, and she really doubts that Abraham can do what needs to be done. So yes, I think God has a sense of humor, and he was having a little fun with Abraham and Sarah. He was still getting his point across and still setting up the nation through which all others would be blessed, but he was doing it in an impossible and unbelievable way. So what I find interesting about this last exchange is that the text doesn't include any judgment from God about either Sarah or Abraham's doubt. It simply ends there. Could it be that God is pleased at bringing amusement to an otherwise very difficult existence? Abraham and Sarah received this promise to become a great nation much, much earlier in the story, and many times throughout the story. And as time went on, Sarah remained barren, and their hope and their trust began to fail. It's kind of understandable. They even tried to go around it. They engaged Sarah's slave to be a replacement. And that sounds immoral to us today, but at the time and that place, it was an established legal custom, and the child that Hagar would have would be considered Sarah's child. But God had something a little less complicated in mind and a little more direct. When he said Sarah was to have a child, he meant Sarah was to have a child. So that child would inherit the promise to Abraham. Now, don't worry about Ishmael. He does get a blessing as well, but the nation that would bring God's blessings would all be through Sarah's child. Abraham and Sarah are used to living with their barrenness. Now they have to rethink all of it. They were hopeless, and now they have a real reason to be hopeful. Imagine a promise made multiple times that you see no possible way for it to be fulfilled. And then, oh wait, here it comes again. I think I might laugh it off too. God asks Abraham and Sarah, and God asks us today, is anything too wonderful for the Lord? Sarah thinks about it because she tries to take back her laughter. Where are your doubts? I know where some of mine lay right now, and this story came at the right time for me to work with. But it's challenging sometimes to remember that nothing is too wonderful for God. God can even open the womb of a 90-year-old woman. So God can do anything. But God also gives us a role to play as well. Remember, this wasn't a virgin birth, as I said earlier. God may have opened Sarah's womb, but Abraham and Sarah had to trust him and each other to fulfill their part of the deal. She may have thought it was crazy, even hilarious, for Abraham and her to conceive at their age, but they did. I love this quote from Ellen Frankel. It's in the 5 Books of Miriam, which is a Jewish women's commentary on the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. She says, "How mystical is the process of birthing children. God opens Sarah's womb. Sarah conceives and gives birth to a child. Abraham provides his seed and names him. All 3 acts, opening the channel of life, nurturing and sending the child forth, giving the child an identity, are equally essential to that child's development. And they are only the beginning. It has been said that it takes a whole village to raise a child. Actually, it takes the whole world." So this highly anticipated and unusual birth is punctuated with uproarious laughter. This time, the laughter is joyous rather than disbelief. Sarah says that God gave her laughter. God, our loving Father, creator of humor and silliness and joy, broke the grip of death, hopelessness, and barrenness. A Jewish legend asks why all others rejoiced and laughed with Sarah when she had the child. The story goes that when Sarah's womb was opened, so were the wombs of other barren women. Sick people were healed, deaf people regained their hearing, blind people received their sight, and madmen were cured of their madness. God granted amnesty to the world. So everyone was overjoyed and laughed with Sarah. So every good father, going back to the beginning of this, loves to hear his children laugh and will do just about anything to get them to laugh. Let's try not to deprive our Father the opportunity to hear us laugh, to find humor, even in our despair, barrenness, and hopelessness. There must be something. Even if we don't see it today, or if we laugh today out of fear and derision, when we listen, and we do our part, God can help us find laughter, fulfillment, and joy. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. It may be 9 months and 5 chapters away, but is there anything too wonderful